Welcome to the PortlyAI Human Capital Squad Talk, where we engage in conversations about the changing business landscape and how human capital and other C-suite leaders are approaching this. I'm Susan Gans, and I'm your host. I'm a board advisor with PortlyAI, as well as a business strategist and outsourced chief of staff with Gans Strategic Solutions. Today, we're in for a treat. So as you know, human resources and culture has been evolving in the age of AI. And today we're doing another special panel discussion on this Human Capital Squad Talk. We're going to explore in this engaging panel discussion the evolution and the corresponding workforce transformation that's happening. So I'm pleased to welcome to our show Anthony Caleo. A little bit about Anthony. He is the founder and chief employee experience officer of Caleo X, where he helps organizations build workplaces that enable people and businesses to thrive. Over the past 2 decades, he's led employee experience, culture, leadership development, and organizational transformation initiatives across industries, including media and entertainment, financial services, technology, healthcare, and high growth startups, including leadership roles with Disney. So he's done a lot. Moving on to Jerry Puleo. Dr. Jerry Puleo is the principal and founder of GA Puleo Limited and former president, CEO of Change Management Solutions, Inc. Another mouthful for me to swallow. Her consulting practice focuses on enhancing employee engagement by eliminating or transforming the organizational conditions that lead to workplace burnout. She has worked across industries with clients, including Microsoft, DDI, Westinghouse, Emerson Electric, to name a few. Her proprietary research-based burnout during organizational change model is the subject of her TEDx talk, which has been viewed over 780,000 times on YouTube, and we will remind the audience about that at the end as well. So, welcome to our show, and last but not least is the founder of PortlyAI, Purvi Kandal. She has a distinguished career in many well-known brands in the supply chain transformation arena. She's done that for pharmaceutical firms in the retail sector, education, and finance. And she brings all of that to bear for the most important supply chain, being the human supply chain with PortlyAI. Okay, welcome everyone.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for having us, Susan and Purvi.
You're welcome. All right, let's get into the conversation. So for all of you, particularly Jerry and Anthony, given your experience in the learning development and the CHRO spaces, what is your perspective on the HR function in the AI era that we're in now?
Would you like me to go first, Anthony?
Sure, please.
Okay. I think the big thing is, and Anthony and I have talked about this a lot, HR needs to learn how to be strategic. It needs to learn how to speak the language of business. So from an L&D perspective, I think the biggest problem is companies focus on what AI can do rather than why they want AI to do it, as well as how AI can help them. And as we all know, some employees use AI and never fact check it, and there's hallucinations that go on. So I think the big thing in the L&D arena is to make sure that you've identified the outcomes, that you've got some human judgment in there, because that's never going to go away. At least I hope not. At least I hope not. What are the outcomes and how are you going to be monitoring this? So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is to get HR more strategic, as well as, understanding the why behind it, not just, we're going to do a training session, here's what Claude can do.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just be, rather than repeating what Jerry shared, I'll just try to be additive. And let's just say too, let's just throw out there from a learning and development standpoint, AI can be an amazing tool from a development standpoint. So to help you develop training, an amazing tool, right? So let's recognize that. I'll look at the cultural side of things because that's both Jerry and my world. If you don't have a particularly healthy culture, and if you have a particularly fear-based culture, right, AI is going to scare the heck out of your workforce. And I think that's a lot of what's happening now. And we're hearing a lot of edicts from from the C-suite saying we've got to, be AI savvy without them fully understanding what AI is to begin with. So it really is, as much as it is a technology story, it's also about taking a hard look at your culture and your organization. And are you ready to, are you ready to adopt it? Are you a highly collaborative organization, which is what's going to really be required in order for everyone to use AI?
Anthony, Jerry, I can kind of add a little bit onto that. I'm spot on both with you guys, right? The board conversations I've had over the past year and a half, quite frankly, all of the board members have shared that, our HR is not strategic. They're very transactional. Our CHRO, we bring them on the table, right? It's not about not having a seat at the table. Do we have the right people within the HR function all the way to the bottom, right? That can actually have a strategic conversation. I think that's been the biggest one of the feedback I've heard. And then Anthony, to your point, right, the organizational culture. I mean, when you think about it, right, more than 80% of employees do not feel the culture of the organization is where it needed to be. And quite frankly, I look at it from also an employee lens, right? And on the other side of the talent lens, I'm like, oh my God, what happened to this culture, right? This culture for the most organization used to be amazing, amazing. And now it's just really gone by the wayside. And, when you look at the stats and the data that are published by some amazing organizations, you hear, right, employees saying HR is they're just very transactional, they're very political, they're not really there to support. And you cannot do AI enablement without having the right collaborative culture. And so if an organization didn't focus on collaboration as the foundation, learning is another, right? Learning as the foundation, those two things.
Yeah.
And if HR enabled, different type of a culture aside from those two, it's going to be very, very hard, right?
Well, I always like to say that many of the employees' experience of HR is the administrative gatekeeper of the status quo. You go to them, what is my pay? What are my bennies going to be? What's my PTO? That's it. And a lot of times HR can't really build what they do within the context of the corporate strategic initiatives and why they're doing it. And they, sadly, HR has to evolve. They just have to, because they can't continue the way they are,
So picking up on that point, Jerry,
Mhm.
what do you then suggest of what's the how of moving the HR function
Mhm.
to be more strategic and to impact the culture to move from not collaborative to being collaborative and from being fear-based to being trusted?
Well, I think a lot of it is you have to use both sides of your brain. It's well, Anthony will vouch for this, since he and I know each other so well. I can go down rabbit holes. I mean, I can go all the way down and then come back up and then go back down again. But I'm also very intuitive. And you have to look at business as a mosaic. You have like the sinews in the business are connecting everything. That's the hard data. But then what turns it into magic? And if you talk to any musician, this is what they talk about. It's not the notes on page. It's how you interpret it. It's what happens between those notes. And I think a lot of it with HR is training. Um, I'm surprised because I've worked with some HR leaders that really don't even like people. You know, they go all the way into the data analysis side and they don't care about the people. Or you have the exact opposite. I'm a people person. I'm a people pleaser. I don't need to know anything about the numbers. They have to do both. And I think this is where the the C-suite comes into play to be able to help make that connection and really appreciate what HR can do. Because if you don't have people, you don't have a company. It's a
I
simple,
agree with you there,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and I'll add that I am still shocked about how little most of the HR teams I know about the business that they're supporting, right? And whatever the business is, it can be highly technical, it can be accounting, whatever it happens to be. You're not expected to be an expert, right? You're an expert in people and culture, but you should really understand a day in the life of everybody inside your organization, right? And you should be more than just an inch deep. You should be a few inches deep. And if you don't have some level of expertise on the business you're supporting, that's problematic. And then to, also add to that, kind of picking up on what Jerry said about, you know, HR being, hire fire, policy driven, right? And yes, you've got to protect the business from a compliance standpoint. No argument there. But more often than not, HR is also seen as shills for management, right? And so there's just like zero trust there. Now, some of that may be, in an attempt to get a seat at the table. HR tries to be a little bit more heavy-handed with employees as opposed to management. But again, that's all about relationship building. I know uh, Priva, you mentioned, having that seat at the table. If you're an HR leader and you don't have a seat on at that table, it's incumbent upon you to get that seat and build that relationship.
And I think also the people in the C-suite need to be trained. They understand the business, but one of the reasons why I think AI is getting so big in HR is we can get away with having less people. And a lot of times, if you talk to an accountant or a finance person, people are just little line items on a financial report. And it's not really discussing what all these people bring to the organization. So I think the training goes, it's not just HR, but the C-suite needs to start understanding all the mosaic of the pieces inside their business. Because a lot of times they don't worry about the people. It's just hire somebody, and we've all heard the horror stories on those.
I also think that, right, this goes back to, right, it is the leader's job to make sure they educate the C-suite, right? And in my
Yeah.
function, right, I wanted to have a seat at the table, but to Anthony's point, like I had to talk data and I also had to talk people, right? So I do think that my observation, over my career and especially in finding in starting PortlyAI, conversations I've had with HR functions and CHROs, what my observation is right, it's the tactical minded functions that have been set up, right? And right, and it's not even about people pleasing, because clearly, right, there's just I think there's just missing things that are there. So if HR doesn't hold themselves accountable, right, it's very easy for them to go hold others accountable and not themselves, right? And I think it needs to be a huge shift. Employees are, in the future with AI, I mean, right? Like so many times people say, "What value is HR adding?" Right? It's like a lot of these things that they've been doing that are transactional and compliance. Once they get automated, and many of them have been, there's really not a value add, and maybe that's why they moved into a political arena where they're playing politics more so than managing what needs to be done, and how do you strategically think about people, right? I mean, that's my observation.
No, I think that's a
Great.
great observation. And I think, most recently, the CEO of Bolt hit the headlines, right, about letting go of most
Yes.
of his HR team. And I actually, a couple of weeks back, I commented and wrote a piece on this. But, part of me was also, yeah, HR probably helped, make that bed. But what did he as a leader understand about human capital, right? I mean, and did he outsource all his leadership responsibilities to the HR team, right? And so there, I know we're, talking a lot about HR, but it is incumbent upon other folks throughout the organization to really understand what HR does, including, like Jerry said, including finance, right? Why is it an expense and how is it being added to the business? So it's not all on HR for sure, but if you're an HR leader and you're in that position, you've got to educate and influence.
So I've been listening to this conversation, and I want to add something that I advocate for, which is around treating people as assets, and what are the returns that you get on those assets when you invest in those assets. And that does take both parties, members of the C-suite, all leaders, and HR in collaboration to understand how can people be revenue drivers? How can people actually reduce expenses and work more efficiently? How can people reduce risk? But I think to points that you made, sometimes people look too myopically into their function and treat the people, like you said, Jerry, like an expense line item, and it's just, oh, just slash.
Can I
Yeah.
throw something out to you?
Yes,
Okay, got to
go
stir the
for it.
pot here a
Here,
little bit.
stir the pot. Go ahead.
I think that employees are tired of being viewed as an asset that generates revenue. And in my research on burnout, it's what I found is there's 10 organizational factors which contribute to employee burnout, especially during transformational organizational change, which, let's face it, AI is transformational organizational change. And the number two reason why they burned out was they felt that the organization didn't care about them, because the metrics used to determine if they were a good performer were so quantitative. I mean, if there was a performance review that said, okay, how many new ideas did you have in the past quarter? Write them down, and we're going to count them. And if you only had 3 and we needed 6, oh, then you're going to be dinged. But it could be that those 3 ideas really turned the company around. And people, and the pandemic changed everything. I mean, if anybody knows me, I keep talking about post-pandemic, but employees want to feel that they care. They want to be viewed as humans, which is, yeah, I can drive revenue, but give me a little bit of grace here because my mother's in the hospital and I might not be able to drive it as much. The number one reason why employees burned out was good old-fashioned poor leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership is not management. Now I teach, I'm sorry, I'm going off on my little tirade here. I've taught in a lot of universities. I am appalled at what business schools teach. They usually, for a business major, don't even have to take an HR course, because let's face it all works in these little spreadsheets and it's real clear. And I'm so surprised why the employees aren't just doing it. So I think that, employees need to understand not just how they drive revenue, but they need to feel a part of the group. And I think that's what Anthony talks about so much in terms of the culture. It's collaborative. They want to help each other. There's trust there. We're all going in the same direction. And sometimes we've all heard about Jack Welch with his performance reviews. I had a friend of mine who worked at Intel in the peak of the .com, and he said it was horrible because it was in that forced ranking system.
Yeah.
So you had the best of the best, and the ones who for some reason were lower were terminated. So I agree with you with what you're saying, that the employees do drive revenue, but it has to be done in a more holistic, humane measure, because that's when employees become human and that adrenaline goes in there. Not long-term adrenaline, because that's a recipe for burnout, but that adrenaline and that, like, how did I do that? How did I come up with that? and to applaud what the employees do. So I'm done with my tirade now.
No, and I think it's perfect because when with the word that came to mind, which I talk to clients a lot about when Susan was setting that up, was ownership. You want all your employees to feel like owners of
Yes.
that
Yes.
business. And so to me, that's really key. Now, what goes into that can be complicated, but it really is about ownership.
It's, and I'll also share kind of from a perspective, right? Part of the reason why Portly was created was because of that HR that's out there, quite frankly. In fact, right, we during the R&D, I mean, I myself experienced it, right? The ones who were really delivering were the ones who were being, shut out and gone because the culture of the organization was made such that if you're basically, you come in and check the boxes and that's all you do. And if there was any real desire to actually, evolve what we were doing, people were pushed out. And we heard that in R&D over and over and over again, right? So there in HR has been the enabler of that, right? HR is the one who's driven that. So when you go back to whether it's revenue, whether it's whatever that is, when HR plays an active role, right, on pushing out people who are actually delivering, guess what kind of message does it send to the rest of the people, right? Oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute, can't do the work, I shouldn't do what do it, right? And that's what creates the fear-based organization. And quite frankly, Jerry, right, I was personally shocked when I observed that people were taking off 2 months mental leaves, and I'd never seen, and I was just shocked. I said, oh my God. And including in HR, people were taking those leaves, right? So for me as a talent, I would have never joined the organization had I known about the issues, and the revolving door and all of that. I looked at it and said, that's an HR and a leadership, and Anthony, to your point, both HR and leadership issue, right?
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of culture, how do you really drive a change? And if you still deliver successfully, right, then, people, they're going to leave. They don't want to stick around because they know they're not going to be valued. So then we can't turn around and say at a board level and say, hey, our people aren't showing up. Well, there's a reason they're not showing up. You haven't stepped up to be real leaders or real, people connectors, right?
And
Well,
it always leads to the conversation, or not always, but I've had the conversation with leaders of, so let them leave. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, right? But think about that. Like, who's staying? That's what should concern you, right? It's the people that are staying, and it's why you're having the issues you're having. So yes, let them leave, and they will leave. Hopefully, they will select out, or they're going to wind up having extreme burnout if they feel like they're stuck. But really, it's like concern yourself about the people that aren't leaving, because that's who that's who you're going to be left with. Because as Jerry can say much better than I can, you're losing your high performers. It's not your low performers that are self-selecting out. They're not the ones. Those aren't the ones getting burnt out. Those are the ones that are learning how to do just enough to get by inside your system,
Yes.
and just enough is not a high performing team.
and let me throw something out. You mentioned about the C-suite saying, let them leave. Who cares? Shall we talk about the elephant in the room? And we're talking about ego here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And, think about it. HR, are they really going to be coaching a CEO, a COO, a CFO? They're not, but those C-suite positions are making a lot of the decisions on the organization. But if they're not getting the feedback and the coaching from HR, and let's be honest, if HR can't talk the language of business and doesn't understand really what the company's doing, why in God's name would somebody in the C-suite listen to them for coaching and mentoring? So I think it's an organization-wide transformation that has to happen. And arrogance usually comes from fear. This CEO who you mentioned, you let him leave. Well, that's because you don't want to look in the mirror and say, what are we doing that is causing people to leave? So yeah.
And you have a simple test is if you go back to that ownership word, if you have a conversation with your leadership and you say our employees should become owners, you're going to find out immediately who has an ego, because generally the one with the biggest egos are the ones like, we own the business, we make the decisions. I'm like, all right, this is going to be a tough conversation.
Yeah. And a lot of time the C-suite doesn't serve as a role model. I
Right.
mean, like I don't have any children, but everybody I know who has kids, and remembering when I was little, You don't learn by what your parents tell you. You learn by what they do,
For sure.
you know.
For sure.
And leaders have to walk that talk. They got to
Yeah,
talk it first, though. But
you bring up such a great point, Jerry, that right, if the CHRO or the HR leader in the ranks below, if the CHRO does not have the ability to coach and have that conversation, that means they really haven't shown up as a leader, right? Then I
Right.
kind of go back to that. Are you a follower or are you a leader? And if you're a follower, I mean, my goodness, that maybe explains a whole bunch of things that have gone on the last decade plus, right, in our environments, right? So how do you now change that? I mean, I've been a big advocate over the last year, couple of years of pushing the board to look at, that talent account, talent transformation, because it certainly hasn't been coming from HR. And that, very rare CHROs I've met, right, that really care about the people, Anthony, right, that you said, right, which should be, or they care about how to do this differently. And those that do, their hands are tied, not because they don't want to do it, because the people below that have been hired, or people above them, or people beside them, none of them want that work, right? We've had it, CFO say, I would love to have this thing done, but my CHRO doesn't want to do it. Or the CHRO says, well, my people below me, they can't execute. So then I'm kind of going, well, then why are you in that seat to begin with? Quite frankly, right? You should actually, opt out and say, go take a retirement because you're not able to handle that.
For sure. And we could do an 8-hour podcast on boards, by the way. So we won't go down that rabbit hole.
I like that.
So I want to come back to a point about the economy becoming more project based and skill based. So as we move into that and we put a spotlight on skills, because traditional roles and how we've thought about functions are going to change, and there's going to be new roles and functions that we can't even conceive of in this very moment.
Mhm.
So my question to the both of you is, what can organizations do now to be more nimble and flexible in preparation and just in this time of a more skills based arena?
I mean, I could start with that one. I think, a simple thing is like if you have a very task-based organization that's, I would say micromanaged, that you're going to have a lot of difficulty, right? Because it's going to require, again, I keep going back to this word, it's going to require a lot of ownership. It's of that we've got a group of trusted employees that we know we're going to assign them a project. We're going to tell them when it needs to get done and what's the expected output. And however they get it done, so long as they get it done on time and on budget, it doesn't matter, what hours they spent. It doesn't matter, if it was 9 to 5, right? But if you have a very task-based, highly overmanaged, or actually overmanaged is not a bad thing if you're intentional, but micromanaged group, you're going to run in a lot of difficulty executing on that kind of project-based role because you're going to go into overdrive trying to micromanage all that process.
and I would say it goes back to strategy and understanding business as a mosaic. All the pieces have to fit together. I'm full-blooded Italian and I like to cook, right? And sometimes you'll make something and you're really busy and you try it and go, oh, I forgot to add the sugar in this, or I forgot to add something else, and the whole thing flops. It's the same thing with the business, except it's not like a puzzle that you've got the picture of the finished puzzle on a box. You got a bunch of pieces there that you're trying to put together. And you have to be nimble because things shift. So I think, when you're talking about project-based and skills-based, it goes back to strategy because when you can see how everything fits together, you can be more nimble. And then again, the leaders have to be open to what their subordinates are recommending. Because if not, you're just putting a different label on it, but the reality is that you're still just micromanaging.
Yeah, it's going to require new levels of sophistication from leaders, quite
Okay.
frankly, too, for sure.
And changes in business school curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, Susan, right? Part of this goes back to this idea, right? We're seeing a lot of companies get rid of middle management layers, right? Because, with AI and with skills, right, it becomes very important. You can get responses very quickly on information, but it requires a knowledge. And if the leaders, right, if we have hierarchies where leaders don't have the actual knowledge of what their teams are doing, they don't understand the process, right? That's gonna be super challenging. And Anthony, to your point, right, this whole idea where people micromanage, right? To AI requires people having a full breadth, end-to-end understanding of the process, so that they know that whatever is being recommended by AI, they can apply the human judgment. But if they're siloed in task-based functions or capabilities, they're not going to be able to do that. So, right, that requires a whole reimagination of how you operate, how you execute, how you do that. And I don't know that our current HR structures and leaders are set up for that. They haven't been able to do what they should have been doing well to begin with.
That's right.
I wouldn't feel comfortable to allow a transactional CHRO to lead that kind of effort. And I hope none of the CEOs for the boards are doing that.
So that sets up perfectly the next question I'm going to ask. So it's really about then when advising your CHROs and the C-suite, Jerry and Anthony, what guidance do you provide to then inspire these new ways of thinking and to throw out old models and introduce new models, knowing that each organization is on a different journey with respect to their own change management processes?
Well, I'll take that, and I'm kind of excited about it. I started developing something that I call my big kahuna model. And the big kahuna model, and I've used this with several companies, and when they start implementing, it makes these changes automatically because it's keeping everything aligned. The big kahuna model you have the big kahuna goal. This is, the big strategic goal, the vision and mission, right? Who are we? What do we want to be doing and why? Now, that's fine and dandy, and that's usually at a C-suite retreat, and then they come back and look at what we've got here, and that's it. What I say then is, okay, for this next year, I want 3 strategic goals, and invariably, my clients look at me and go, "Oh, we have more goals than that." I said, "Nope, 3 major overarching goals that go across functional areas, that go across hierarchies, and go across departments. 3 of them. And then it's the department's leader's role to say, what do I have to do that will help us to achieve each one of these goals?" So you got the key strategic goals, but you can't achieve the strategic goals unless you've got a culture in place that this is the way we do things. And we all know cultures, we have these beautiful things on the walls and everything else, but culture are the unwritten rules of how we do things here. Doesn't matter what you did at another company, how do we do things here? What's that knee-jerk reaction? So then what I tell them is, okay, you need to come up with 3 key cultural characteristics. This gets interesting because invariably they say things trusting, and we've got this, and it's like, okay, start defining it. One company I worked with decided that they needed to be data-driven and people-centric. That's major, and you can see how all the different departments react. Now, that's fine. You've got a culture that's in place that'll help you achieve the strategic goals, but the way you keep a culture together are through core competencies that every member of that organization has to varying degrees, depending on what their job is. So what are those 5 core competencies that everybody needs? You do it in the recruiting, you do it in the onboarding, you do it in the performance reviews, all the way through. So now when you have people who have these core competencies, that reinforces the culture. That means the organization can as a whole achieve the strategic goals. They achieve the strategic goals, and then they're going to hit the big kahuna goal and achieve that too. And I'll tell you, I found it's a very simple model, because you know what a lot of like business plans are. It's like page after page after page. And yes, I've been guilty of doing some of those myself, but this makes it easy. And then, especially for the core competencies, they have to define what those competencies are. What does it mean to be an owner?
Yeah.
Everybody has a different definition. So if you have, this is what ownership means in our organization, and then through repetition. Yeah, I like this. This is my newest model.
Yeah. And I'll just say to tie the cultural piece in, it's about your missions, visions, value, and purpose. And as important as all of those are truly are, what separates those from just being words on your website or on a poster in a conference room is how you operationalize those. And operationalizing those, your missions, visions, value, and purpose is the job of everybody inside the organization to make what Jerry just talked about possible.
Agreed.
It's also like it makes me wonder though, right? It's sort of like, yeah, based on the work that I've been doing also, like I look at it and say, HR doesn't have the competency to figure out their own competencies. So how are they helping the leaders figure out the competencies of the rest of the organization, right? So I think there's such a big disconnect, right? And even right, a lot of the competencies, right? And this is I think where the feedback comes from employees. More than 71% think that HR just plays politics. So it's the lack of, it's kind of like blind leading the blind, I feel like, right? That's what's been going on. And so how do you even get to that place, right? And I think it's a big challenge, and employees see this, right? And then sort of how do you navigate around any of these things, right?
Yeah, and that's the HR is, these values are for thee, not me, which
Yeah.
is on top of what you said, which makes it even worse because as we said during this conversation, employees are watching. They're watching what you're saying and they're watching what you're doing. And if those are not congruent, you're going to have a problem.
I remember there was one senior VP of HR for a very, very large company who I was working with. And he looked at me and he said, "We use core competencies already." I said, "Great." I said, "What's one of them?" "College degree." I said, "What?" He said, "A college degree, that's a core competency." No, it's not. Core competencies are basically those soft skills. Okay, so a college degree. I have a college degree in horticulture and basket making. Does that mean that I'm going to be able to work in this manufacturing organization? And he was the SVP. And he got very indignant when I said that is not a competency. Let's just put it this way, it was an interesting project.
I
I
can
mean,
only imagine.
like it reminds me of the experiences that we've had, right? It's kind of the past. I kind of say past title does not make you competent for what you need to do next. And I think that whole structure of industrial era just needs to probably be blown apart because it doesn't work, and it's certainly not going to work in the age of AI, right? So it's fascinating to see, but people are hanging on to it with a dear life, right? Where they're not able to execute, they're not able to add value, but because I had the past title or because I did X, Y, and Z, therefore I'm quit. It's just not a good messaging feature.
So, in closing us out today, what would each of you like our audience to remember about our conversation?
Well, I'll take that. We've been talking about AI, but I think we've expanded into more than just AI. And
Yes.
I think AI in some ways is the canary in the coal mine. It's going to expose all the problems that are in the organization, and not in the way that I think many leaders think those problems are going to be explored. I think that one of the big things is to remember that AI needs to be viewed as a tool and not as a sage. Just because AI says it, it does not necessarily make it true. I was doing some stuff with ChatGPT, and I threw something new in. Oh, that changes the entire calculation then. But I think it as you said in the beginning, Anthony, AI is powerful and it can really be helpful. but it doesn't direct you, you need to direct that. And so I think that need for human judgment, again, the training with strategy and what it really means to run a business, I think the importance in judgment and critical thinking is really going to increase.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to focusing on your people and culture. So they're prepared for change, they're prepared for collaboration. It's going to require new paradigms in leadership. And if we're not using this as an opportunity to think about, rethink how we do work to begin with, right? I mean, we were not constructed to come to work 9 to 5, right? It is not natural to sit in a cubicle with really bad air conditioned air and horrible fluorescent lighting. There's nothing natural about that. So let's use this as an opportunity to rethink how we do work.
I would
Kirby?
say, from my point of view, it really is about, understanding the skills and the desire that the talent has, right? We are no longer, slavery went out the door a long, long time ago, even though some leaders may not want to believe that. The reality is, right? We want to listen to our talent, but we also want to hold them accountable, right? Accountability, right? Just I want to do something versus actually holding them accountable to commit to getting it done. I think those are lost skills over the
Yeah.
past decade or so in organizational cultures, and that need to be resetted, because without that, you're going to have a lot of challenges in organization adopting to AI, right? And AI is not going to show an ROI because there are enough people who really haven't had to be held accountable for what they did or didn't do, right? And so I think that leaders need to look at it, companies need to look at it a little bit differently and say, how do I apply consistency to everyone? And, in the same manner. And guess what? AI can actually uncover hidden truths that today are very easily hidden, right? And so there's a lot of exposure it has. So, organizations really have to think about this differently and think about it from a talent first. It's the most important supply chain we have. And if we don't have people who can think like that, it's a different conversation to have internally.
Yeah.
So I want to thank all three of you for taking the time to provide your insights in this lively dialogue today. What I took away is a mutual understanding between of the business by HR and the business also understanding people, and what does that mean. And I also took away this notion, that term that Jerry used with respect to the mosaic. So it's really understanding holistically and also a bit of intuition to know how things fit together. I would also say to invite curiosity into
Mhm.
the picture as a tool one can use, and therefore then human judgment enters the picture. It hasn't left. And finally, I would like to say that we explored a lot about collaboration in different ways, and collaboration versus being transactional. So I want everybody to find each of you. So I'm going to give out some particulars on that. So Anthony Caleo can be found via LinkedIn under Anthony B, as in boy, Caleo, or his website, which is Caleo X, so CALLEOEX.com. So that is Anthony. Jerry Julio can be found in a couple of ways. You can look up her TEDx talk, which is Burnout versus PTSD, more similar than you think. And you could email her at Geri, GERI, at GAPULEO.com. And Purvi, you can find Purvi at portly.ai, or via LinkedIn, or her email, which is Purvi, PURVEE, at portly, PORTLY, .ai. So if you would like to learn more about PortlyAI and Squad Talk, please visit the website portly.ai. And in the squad spirit, keep growing and evolving and leading the way. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.